Now, in a sickening letter sent out across the country, April 3rd has been dubbed Punish a Muslim Day. The letter rates various stages of attack on Muslims, including 25 points for pulling off a woman's headscarf, 500 points for murdering a Muslim, and 1,000 points for bombing a mosque. Suspect packages with unidentified liquids have also been sent to 4 Muslim MPs at Westminster. For over 10 years, I've argued that legal but inflammatory language by Muslim extremists creates an atmosphere in which jihadist terrorists can recruit. So similarly, language that stokes up anti-Muslim sentiment will create an atmosphere that breeds anti-Muslim violence. Assuming this letter turns out genuine, and I say that with a big caveat, I urge sections of the media and anti-Islam campaigners to pause and deeply ponder their use of language. I'm making no suggestion they had any involvement in the letter directly, but all of us have a responsibility to challenge extremist rhetoric. You can advocate against religion without inciting against its believers, just as you can say smoking is bad without saying you hate all smokers. People should be free to scrutinise Islam, but they must not aid the hatred of Muslims.
Maajid, there's no argument around this table that those leaflets were vile and disgusting and should not be allowed to circulate in this country. But what I hear at the back of what you're saying there, this is about free speech. It's about what people say and how they say it. And I guess you could say that free speech depends upon the ability to criticise, to ridicule, to just dispute with, and we have to be able to do that, even if it's in a way that you don't necessarily agree with. I mean, I think we've talked before, and you talk to me about newspapers and the language they use when they're covering stories that involve Muslims. But I wanted to read you something that the despicable Anjem Chowdhury said after the Charlie Hebdo massacres, and he was saying that Muslims may not agree with he said they don't agree with the idea of freedom of expression. Even non-Muslims who espouse it say it comes with responsibilities. He said, in an increasingly unstable and insecure world, the potential consequences of insulting the messenger Muhammad are known to Muslims and non-Muslims alike. Now, that last sentence seems to say to me that they were warned, they had it coming. And so every time we tell people not to say things in a certain way, not to say things that we disagree with, we're giving credence to Chowdhury and his belief that, don't say things that I don't like because there will be consequences. And I think in this nation we live in, I mean, you're talking presumably about the free speech in newspapers, and I'm sure there are probably 1 or 2 particular newspapers you don't like the way they would cover a story that involved a Muslim. But I still think we can't, in the same free speech, it's nasty.
Allow hate speech, Carol.
Sorry?
This isn't free speech.
This isn't free speech. It's not. We're not talking about hate. We're not
This
talking
is hate speech.
The whole reason that Anjem Chowdhury was prosecuted is because there are limits on what you can say in a democracy where there is free speech, and there's also protection against hate speech. So I think my interpretation of what Maajid is saying is that some of the rhetoric in the press has transgressed from valid debate into inciting hate against Muslim groups.
And give me some examples.
I'll give you examples.
Yeah,
right? So I don't want to name names for obvious reasons, but we know that of late there have been some very prominent campaigners, some of whom have been accused by their own political party that if they were to come to prominence, it would be like Nazis taking over their own political party because of their views on Muslims. Likewise, other prominent campaigners, some of them have been my colleagues, have said things like, use words like the final solution when referring to Muslims. What I'm urging everybody to do...
And not just Muslims. Jews.
I'm not saying we ban speech that we don't like. What I'm saying is there is an area between illegal speech, which is directly inciting violence, and what we find acceptable within civil society. That grey area is usually when we challenge bigoted speech, even if it's legal. So, if a Muslim extremist came on this show and said, I want to kill gays in the future caliphate, we would all challenge them, even though they are perfectly within
But you would accept it's been said in the public arena. That very thing has been said in the public arena. Hold on, Carol. They're perfectly within their legal rights to say that, because they're talking about a future law they want in a state. But we'd still nevertheless challenge them. We wouldn't tolerate that speech. And I'm arguing, likewise, if somebody's an anti-Islam campaigner uses words such as final solution,
to deal with Muslims after a terror attack. That speech needs to be challenged, and it has no place in civilised
You're
society.
right. You're absolutely right. But what I find astonishing in the you're talking about right wing here. If you look at the left wing arena, in our very own Labour Party, we have people in that party saying the most hideous things about Jews, and yet it doesn't go unchallenged, but it actually largely goes unpunished.
But you're preaching to the choir, Karen. Yeah. This is what's aboutery here. I'm not sure why you're sidestepping.
Maajid, you said something interesting. You said you called on all media organisations, I'm going to quote the words, to pause. Are you saying, is there a danger in some instances that by reporting these stories, actually you are bringing them to a wider audience who aren't aware of it, and these vile specimens think, wow, how do I sign up? Is that something is that what you were driving?
But there is that danger, but that shouldn't stop us reporting on it, not at all. And that's why I use the example that smoking is bad, not all smokers are bad people.
Okay.
We've got to be able to report about it in a responsible way now.
And you sense that's not happening?
Well, with the examples I gave, it's certainly not. There are certain prominent campaigners who speak in inflammatory ways, and also, of course, certain tabloid newspapers have inflammatory ways of dealing with.
Still?
Words like cockroaches referring to...
Well, that's one extreme example. It was a disgusting example.
I'm not saying ban speech. I'm saying just as we wouldn't want Islamists running around saying extremist things without being challenged, I'm saying we should also challenge some rhetoric that's coming from anti-Muslim quarters.
I think we've got to look at, Carol's point is, free speech, but we have to see the consequences of not checking, if not having a pause, because the rise in hate crime, religious and race crime has gone up by, something like 30% since last year or 2 years.
29%.
29%.
Just over 80,000.
That is a real indictment of the tone of society at the moment, the tone of discourse, and the fact that we are seeing such polarisation, but also a sense of a licensing of some of the xenophobia that there's been an outbreak of.
Okay, but there was a report.
What is behind the licensing of xenophobia?
I'd like to say something. I think it's ironic that we're having this debate at the end of this show, because today we've talked about Muslim grooming gangs, and we've also talked about people mainly from Muslim communities, because it's Pakistani and Bangladeshi women who are particularly identified by Louise Casey as not speaking English. Now, all of those stories are completely valid and areas that I think we've all agreed deserve attention. But they feed into, because of the underlying prejudice in the society, a sense of Islamophobia. And if you go to an EDL rally, as I have, you don't hear there is a minority of people in the Muslim community that's abusing girls. You hear Muslim pedos off our streets.
That's the language I'm talking about.
And we have, and it's not a level playing field. So I am committed to free speech, but I also acknowledge that free speech is not equally free, because there are some groups who have disproportionate platform and others who don't have a platform at all, and that is my worry. And that's why I can see how this
isn't the Muslim community coming out and challenging the stereotypes more?
How many Muslim editors are there of newspapers, columnists and newspapers, TV anchors, people on chat shows? The reality is they're underrepresented.
How many Chinese editors are there?
Is racism against Chinese people a huge issue in society? No.
We have a double problem. There aren't enough Muslims challenging things like the grooming gangs. At the same time, we've got this problem, which is why it's actually a good thing we're debating it on the same show, because it shows there's a triple threat we're facing, whether it's the far left extremists, the far right extremists, or the theocrats. And we shouldn't look. If we were going to worry about the consequences of topics we pick, then we may as well say nothing at all ever. We've got to be able to discuss things like Russia. We discuss Russia. It may well incite World War III. We have to talk about it, right?